Hello, I am Dr. Ted Richardson, the Dean of the Fisk College of Business at Florida Tech. In 2018-2019 program year, weVENTURE served 623 unique clients, helped launch 29 new businesses, and their clients generated over $5.6 billion in gross revenue with 31 jobs created. This program provides vital resources, education, and training to help women pursue financial independence and professional success. As Dean, I am in a unique position to support weVENTURE and the clients they serve. This is a responsibility I do not take lightly. Male allies play a critical role in addressing the systemic inequalities that women still face. As Monique just mentioned, engaging with male colleagues also helps us to become better advocates for women. Our next speaker is the first female four-star general in military history. General Anne Dunwoody has been called the best logistician the Army has ever had. And as Commander of Service Deployment and Distribution Command, she supported the largest deployment and redeployment of U.S. forces since World War II. During her career, Dunwoody managed 69,000 military and civilians located in all 50 states and more than 140 countries. Along with that, she managed a budget of $60 billion. She was also a member of the 82 Airborne Division and enjoys jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. General Dunwoody is a Florida Tech alumnus and currently serves on the University Board of Trustees. Since her retirement from the military, General Dunwoody has enjoyed the opportunity to share her story. In a book, A Higher Standard, General Dunwoody shares leadership insights from her remarkable career and experiences during the first days of integrating women in the late 1970s. I hope you will enjoy excerpts from the conversation you recently had with Dr. Beth Gitlin, former Executive Director of weVENTURE and also an Army veteran.
Well, General Dunwoody, it is such a pleasure to interview you this afternoon, and I really thank you for taking the time to take some time out of your day to answer some questions about leadership today, and I really am looking forward to it. I've had such a strong woman crush, I call it, instead of a girl crush on you since I first met you 7 years ago, because there's a lot of background in the book that you talk about that I feel like part of that's my story too, especially in my early years. So
you're going to make me blush.
So I'd love to just get started by talking about, many see you as a trailblazer, the first female four-star general, but can you tell us a little bit about your leadership journey? One of the things I read about in your book, and I read it the first time, and then I just reread it this week, that obviously the title is called A Higher Standard, and that meant a lot to me, and you talked a lot about what that meant. But one of the biggest takeaways I took from it was, don't walk by mistakes was one of those things. But can you talk about your leadership philosophy and your journey a little bit throughout the years?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I never really saw myself as a trailblazer, nor did I consider myself one. And many know that I never even had any intention of coming into the military. Since I was 5 years old, I was always going to be a coach and a phys ed teacher. And that's all I ever wanted to do. And even though I came from a military family, never dreamed or even thought about joining the military. And when I had this opportunity to come into the military after I graduated from college for just 2 years, and I knew it was just going to be a short 2-year stint en route to my coaching and teaching profession, what I realized is that I really loved being a soldier and I loved leading soldiers. And I remember telling my dad that, I'm going to stay in as long as I enjoy what I'm doing and I can make a difference. And so I never dreamed about being a four-star general. It was never an aspiration. I just did every job, one job at a time, and tried to make a difference and be the best I could be in each one of those assignments. So at that time, we were doing the integration of women into the Army. We had just disestablished the Women's Army Corps. And so I saw my job at the time, along with all the female cohorts that came in the same time I did, was to help with the integration, the real integration of women into the regular Army, and not let us be pushed into clerk jobs and typical female assignments like cooks, and allow us to have those same career paths as our male counterparts. Mm-hmm. And so that was exciting, and it was rewarding. Mm. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book is when I retired, everyone kept saying, when are you going to tell your story with becoming the first female four-star? I know you had to fight and claw your way to the top and, do all these things. And that's when I realized I needed to write this book about leadership, because it really was, my journey was a lot more about leadership than gender. And when you talk about, in my world, I never saw myself as a female soldier. I saw myself as a soldier. And you mentioned earlier about never walking by a mistake. And that's one of the very earliest leadership lessons I learned as a brand new second lieutenant from my platoon sergeant. And it really resonated throughout my career. Now that briefs really well. You see something wrong and you correct it, no matter how small or how large. And it really takes personal courage, because many times you'll see something, that's not my job, that's their problem, I'm not going to worry about it. But in an institution like the military, where standards do matter, when you do walk by a mistake, you just set a new lower standard in the eyes of the offender. So if you don't make an on-spot correction, then they say, well, it's okay not to wear my headgear. It's okay to have my hands in my pocket. It's okay not to maintain my weapon to standard. Well, if you don't maintain your weapon to standard in a peacetime army, it might be a malfunction, but if you do it in wartime, it could lead to a fatality. So standards matter, and it's incumbent upon everyone. We are a self-policing organization. And if we don't enforce those standards, it's a slippery slope, and people get hurt and people can lose their lives. And I say that doesn't just necessarily apply to the military. When you think about civilian industry and commercial activities, think how many times you've had headlines where walking by a mistake, where there was General Motors when they didn't pay attention to the issues they had with the cars causing fatalities, and Volkswagen or Wells Fargo. People knew these things were going on, but people just looked the other way. So it's just not a military thing. It's a thing that's resonated with my entire life. And now in the civilian world, I see that the same principles apply.
Yeah, I really get that. And over the years, it's been really interesting. Most of my time has been spent in the business world. I spent 4 years in the military as a lieutenant, but always had that idea of standards matter. Then when I got into the business world, I would have pressure sometimes from people saying, well, they might say, well, you're just a perfectionist, or, if it's 80% done, then it's okay. So at what point, where do you draw that fine line between, not walking by a mistake versus we need to get on and not have analysis paralysis, for example?
No, that's a great question. And I would say no mistake is too small, but at the same time, compromising the standards can also lead to a challenge. And just correcting a mistake or making on-spot correction, it doesn't have to be a yelling and screaming the thing, and it doesn't have to be rate anybody. It might just be educational. The soldier didn't know he was supposed to wear his headgear when he was outdoors, not supposed to put his hands in the pocket, or on and on. And I think the same thing is in the civilian world, where you're seeing that. But there is this attitude that, oh, you're going to raise the high bar, and now all of us who had this kind of nice, easy road, you're ruining the standard by exceeding the standard. And I have just the opposite opinion of that. I think much of my success, and I'm sure yours too, is because we exceeded the standards. When you exceed the standards, people notice, and not exceed the standards for your own behalf, but for the good of the organization. And your reputation, you shouldn't have to be your own advocate. People should say, gosh, look at Beth, she's really sharp. She's done, and she's making a difference, and I want her on my team. And I equate people who exceed the standards, it's kind of like A students, and people who meet the standards, that's kind of like a C student. And then those who fail to meet the standards, well, that's, substandard performance. And when you're building high-performing teams, you want to be surrounded with people that are A students, people that want to exceed the standards and make a difference.
Another question I'd love to ask about your leadership philosophy is you really don't talk too directly about it in your book, but it just exudes from the stories that you tell. And it's about the values that you espouse as a leader. And you talk about the influence of both your father and mother, and a lot of the military men who I can't remember all their names, but all of the mentors that you had. But what for you are the top, I don't know, any 3 to 5 values that you just live by that are important to you and you think are important as a great leader, to be a great leader?
Well, you're right. I was blessed to grow up in the best mom and dad in the world. And so my entire family grew up with values, knowing the difference between black and white, right and wrong. And so that was my foundation. And then in college, I had 2 coaches, my tennis coach and my gymnastic coach, which also reinforced those values and taught me that there's as much from winning as I did from losing, and from about building teams and building confidence. And that all transitioned nicely into the military, where I know you said 1 or 2 or 3, but it's from the heart, it's from the soul. And I'd say one of the most important leadership is compassion and empathy, so that you can relate to your soldiers and their families' challenges and always being on the look at that. And then I said personal courage might be one of the toughest ones, because you have to make tough decisions, and they're not always the popular decisions. And you're going to get fought on some of those really hard ones because people don't want to rock the boat. I don't say this that, the boss gets the final word. And so you make the case and the boss says, I hear you, Dunwoody, but I got to go this way. And if it's something you think is illegal, immoral, or whatever, you might have to choose a different profession. Or you say, okay, I try to make the case. It's not that severe a thing. It's, the boss is right and I can live with that. And it's always a personal decision though, because you can't be complicit. You want to, make the case, and then you have to decide whether it's something you can live with or not.
And I know the listeners to this video are wondering, well, in some cases, like what you're talking about, they have a boss that, what the right thing is to do, and you have to have that personal courage. And you shared a story that, you actually have to have that courage to go speak to others sometimes if that you've gone to your boss and it's not about getting a satisfied answer, but knowing that maybe you're not heard and you feel like you need to do one more step to be heard. Can you share a little bit about one of those stories that people get that taste of it? Because I hear from so many of my colleagues and stuff that they run into that and they kind of just don't know what to do. It's just a barrier, it's a wall. Now what's next? Or what else can I do with regard to that?
Yeah, those are those tough choices, and a case, and I talk about it in my book, but there's been several in my career, and I'm sure yours too, because in both worlds, civilian and military, where I knew there was a readiness issue in an organization I had just taken over, and we report readiness issues every month. And this particular case was pretty serious. There was a number of parachutes that we had available in the division, and it was not the number that the senior leadership of the division assumed or thought we had, because we've been doing a lot of war and we'd done just cause, we lost a lot, but the accountability wasn't that good. And so when we really got our arms around what our readiness posture was, we could only drop 1 brigade of airborne troopers instead of 3 brigades, which was what we should have been able to do. So I put that in my readiness report, and the division commander that time was traveling a lot. And he said, I just want to talk to commanders who have a readiness issue by exception. So I went to my boss and I said, we need to get this to the division commanders on his radar screen so that he knows what the capability is, just in case we got called out to do something he needs to know. And he refused to do that. He said, I'm not going. And it was kind of shut up in color kind of thing. And I'm like, I went home and I couldn't sleep that night. Mm-hmm. And my gut was turning, and I knew that we had to get this information to the division commander. And my boss might have fired me, give me bad or whatever, but I said, I have to do this. And so I went back and told him, I said, I'm going to go up there and I sure like it if you go with me. And he said, I'm not going. So I went to see the division commander and laid out the issue. And he was so appreciative of now knowing what the real readiness challenge was for the division. And then he went to Corps and was able to start getting money to replenish the parachute so we get our readiness back. So they're hard times, and I'm sure my boss never really got over it, and certainly wasn't one of my advocates for the rest of my career. It didn't kill me, but my division commander, the respect went tenfold.
Yeah.
And so he became one of those men behind the curtain and advocates throughout my entire career because of that kind of behavior and that kind of leadership.
Let's talk a little bit more about the man behind the curtain. You had a chapter on the people working behind the scenes on your behalf. And I know in one part of it, you called them advocates more so than mentors. And in one part of it, you talked about, there were advocates, Janus faces, and detractors. And it's really interesting. Just last night, I looked up the word Janus face because I really hadn't heard it before. And it meant two-faced after the Janus, and I hadn't thought about it. But can you tell me a little bit about how important having those men and for everybody, women behind the curtain, and also a little bit about the three types of leaders that you encountered and how you were able to turn some of those Janus faces and maybe detractors into advocates as well?
Yeah, sure. This was a tough part of the book because everyone wants to know, oh, who's their favorite leader? Who's the worst leader? And I didn't want to get into name calling. I just wanted to, talk about leadership styles. So as I thought about it, the three broad categories I thought were the advocates I had, which I had a lot more of those than the other two. The Janus facer, that was a word I didn't know either, but one of the guys that was editing my book suggested I use it, and I had to go look it up too because I had patronizers in there, and it's kind of the same thing, the two-faced piece. And then there's the distractors, and the advocates. They're all in. They believe in you. They're advocating for you whether you know it or not. In front of you, behind you. The patronizers or the Janus facers or the two-facers, they're the ones to your face, oh, you're so wonderful. And then behind your back, they're saying bad juju things or, things that are not complimentary. And then the detractors, in the military, just some people, this is a man's world. What are you doing here? It's not about you. It's just that you're a distractor. You shouldn't be in this business. There's just people that have that kind of mindset. So that's how I kind of categorize the people that I met and worked for and with over my tenure. And I said, I had many, many more advocates, but there is the challenge you mentioned is how do you make and convert some of either the Janus facers or the detractors. And what I tell everyone is stay on the moral high ground. And that briefs well too, but it's hard to do. If someone says something bad, the first thing you want to do is hit them back or do something, point, counterpoint. But what I found is that you stay on the moral high ground, you're fair and you're professional, you continue to make a difference, and you continue to exceed the standards, people sometimes, you can convert, you can make believers out of non-believers. Now, not all of them, but many of them. Because you don't lower your standards, you don't stoop to low tactics like name calling and innuendos. You just stay on the moral high ground and do the right thing for the right reason. So I think people put themselves in those own categories. That's just kind of how as I looked back over my career, the kinds of people I work with, those seem to help me.
But it sounds like you were trusting over time, but if a couple of things would happen that were inappropriate behaviors or something that wasn't acceptable to you, then you would understand what category they would fall into and then how to deal with it.
Yeah. And you're right. It's people who their true colors are their true colors,
Yeah.
and either you are or you're not, or and many times their colors don't change.
One thing I forgot to mention, and I'm assuming everybody has read your book, and maybe they haven't, but I think they should. I highly recommend it. Can you explain what the man behind the curtain means? I forgot to explain that earlier on.
Oh, my apologies. Me too. I've talked about it so much I forget. I call it the man behind the curtain because in my case they were all men, but I say behind the curtain because it was invisible to me on many occasions that they were actually being an advocate for me. I would have And I think about it like the Wizard of Oz. That's where the image can, here's the great guys pushing all these buttons and making things happen. And, no one really knows what's going back behind that mysterious curtain. And I didn't realize it till much later that there was this informal coaching and mentoring and advocacy that goes on outside the institutional kind of army that I was unaware of. I had assignments changed. I was going to Hawaii one time. All of a sudden I was going to Fort. How did that happen? And no one could really explain until later. And I didn't even know who that mentor or advocate was until much later, when they're telling war stories saying, yep, you're going here, but that was the wrong assignment. You need to be going here. You need to stay in this environment. And that's what you deserve to do. But that happened several times. And it's a really important part for all of us, because all of us have, if we don't have those kinds of advocates, like I said, you can't advocate for yourself. You don't want to advocate for yourselves. Those are the chest beaters. Those are the yay me's. They should look at me kind of people. And if you prove yourself and you exceed standards and you make a difference, you'll have advocates, because everyone will want you on their team.
So what I hear you saying, because this is talked about in so many women's conferences I've been at, and in leadership development for women programs and that kind of thing, is that a lot of women are told, go find yourself a mentor. And they're like, well, do I just go up and ask someone? And I've had women do that, which it just doesn't work. You don't go ask the speaker at the conference. And I'm sure you've probably had so many women come up to you after you've done a keynote and said, would you be my mentor? Or can I email you about things? But they just don't sometimes know what to do, because they haven't had that opportunity for that man behind the curtain being their advocate. So what I hear you saying is that exceeding expectations and doing great work, it should naturally come. But is it okay to go and ask other people to be a mentor or to ask for help? Or in what situations would that be okay? And how would that work, do you think?
I think the discussion needs to go more to senior female execs or men, that they should be on the lookout. Who are you mentoring? Who are you? Because the most important thing, if I had any legacy in the whole Army, it's not how many times I jumped on airplanes, how many miles I ran. It's developing the bench, developing that bench of future leaders. So then you walk off in the sunset, you can look back and go, wow, we're in such good hands. And when I ask people about who should be your replacement, they're like, no one. Well, they're failing miserably, because we should all be grooming and training and coaching our replacements. And it's not, doesn't have to be just your fair-haired person. It's a bench. And so then there's choices and options, but you got to grow that bench. And so I think in the civilian world, and we have a very deliberate system in the military. Professional development, from assignment to training, progressive assignments, education, promotion boards, OERs, on and on. And I think in the civilian world, that's not as rigorous as you would say, and sometimes it's haphazard. And
some companies have it and some companies don't. It's not standard. Yeah.
Right. It's gotten much better. I've seen it even in my board rooms. People, we push hard on succession planning, and that requires a lot more time, energy, and investment in people as you're growing the bench.
That's fantastic. I was thinking about, and you've mentioned it, your last command was, overseeing 69,000 people, I believe. And I've taught some classes here locally, and, I ask people how many think of themselves as leaders, and they're all leaders, but maybe half the class raises their hand. And I think it's because they think that they're not leading people. But what would you say to those people who might not think of themselves as leaders, but really are, and how they can make a difference, as an influencer?
Yeah, I would ask, and what question I ask is, how many people want to be a part of a high performing organization? And all the hands go up, because who doesn't want to be part? And how many don't? Well, that answers that question. So now, how do you get to be a high performing organization? And it's incumbent upon these young leaders, it doesn't just happen. You have to get the vision, get the buy-in, hold the standards. And what I found out is everyone wants to be part of a high-performing organization. And so we need to encourage and inspire folks, because what I've seen when you And I've never taken over a perfect organization, and I've never left a perfect organization. I try to make every organization I'm part of better. But the high bar is the high performing organization. And what you find is it's infectious. When people believe they're part of a high performing organization, and these young leaders are the ones that inspire and motivate them to do that. You know, you start getting Soldier of the Month, and then everyone wants to be Soldier of the Month, and CFC. And I say high performing organizations are organizations that do routine things in an outstanding manner routinely. An organization that does routine things in an outstanding manner routinely. And you can spot them. You can walk into an organization and you can smell it, feel it, and know it. You can run PT formation and you know if it's high performer, if they're dragging their feet, they're sounding off, they're not have their road guard vest, they don't have every organization. I can walk in about 5 minutes, tell is this highly motivated, just by looking around, a motor pool or the rags on the ground, is it dress right dress? And so as leaders, that's their challenge. And when they do that, they'll know and they'll feel it, because it feels really good when you have people to be so proud of being part of your organization.
That's excellent. That reminds me of a saying. I have a mentor in dragon boat coaching. I coach dragon boat that
Wow.
told me a story. Yeah, it told me a story, and it was just chop wood, carry water, meaning like do those things that are basic, chopping wood and carrying water, but in the best manner possible. So every time I'm out there, whether it's exercising or in an organization, I keep having that mantra go through my head: chop wood, carry water.
Keep it simple.
You told the story way better, but anyway, a couple more questions I'd love to ask you. One is talking about leading in times of great anxiety and stress, or in difficult times. And I want to take a quote from page 72 in your book. And it's in the chapter regarding the enemy within. It says, for a great leader, colleague, friend, or parent to be his best, he has to acknowledge his worst. Throughout my life, I've met plenty of superheroes, but the strongest and most effective among them were the ones who were simply human and knew they weren't perfect. They were the men and women who, like my father, believed in their duty to country and sacrificed for hours without hesitation. They all had their strengths and weaknesses. And you mentioned, the enemy within your career was stress. And it got me thinking about a lot of the stress that people were going through nowadays in leading during COVID times. So what advice can you give women leaders during this time of difficult leadership, having their businesses remain open, trying to reopen their businesses, getting loans, or getting the finances to help pay for what was lost, all of the things that these small businesses are trying to do just to make a living.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, my heart goes out, because these are trying and frightening times for sure. And for a myriad of reasons that are on the news every day, which can be very disheartening. And from my own background, this is a time when we really need to dig deep. We can't do it on our own, and we can't expect others to do it for us. So we really we can't wring our hands right now. We need to roll up our sleeves, and we need to reach out to our families and our friends and small business owners. I believe every person counts. Every person can make a difference, whether big, small, a handshake, a thank you, a job, a tip, a blessing. We can all make a difference and make somebody's life better every day. We can't do it on our own. The stress part is real. And in my book, I talk about, me, big paratrooper, thinking I'm strong and invincible like so many do. And I had a period as a young captain when I was, my relationship was on the rocks. I was moving to Germany to work in a secondary MOS I didn't enjoy, which was personnel. And I lived in a house at the time, which was very unsatisfying, very unsatisfying. And so I kept it all inside. I didn't say anything to anybody. I kept doing my duty. I'm a paratrooper, right? I can do it all. And I go to work and do my job. And one morning I woke up so ill. just started happening. My stomach was upset. So I went to see the doc, and he says, he did these tests and run all that stuff, and he comes back out and says, "Are you under any stress?" And I go, "Me, paratrooper, and I got the easiest job in the community. I'm like the Walmart greeter." And then it hit me. Here's a good Catholic girl whose marriage is on the rocks. I hated my job. I didn't like where I lived, and I hadn't talked to anybody about it, not even my parents. And he said, "Well, you got a bleeding ulcer, and if you don't take care of it, you're going to find yourself out of the Army." And I went, whoa. And so I flew home from Germany to see my parents, and I was so worried that they were going to consider me a failure, Catholic girl, not making it through marriage. And they were so supportive. It was like the world had been lifted off of my shoulders. "Anne, you tried your best. It wasn't meant to be. Life will go on, and you got to do what you got to do." I'm like, oh my gosh, that was the beginning. So I went back to Germany. I got a company command and a new house, and the old Dunwoody was back. But the lesson was we do think we're invincible. And what I say to all of you is be on the lookout when people aren't themselves, so to speak. And I've seen this throughout my career, men, women. We had a brigadier general break down, a friend of ours in theater, trying to be airborne ranger 24/7 all the time, kids getting injured and think he could do it, and physically broke down. And I see this every day. I'll see a guy who's always chipper and say, "Hey, what's going on?" Well, they just found out he had cancer. But we all have, things going on in our life, whether it's financial, relationship, health, sick mom and dad, that we need to have a good friend, buddy, boss that you can share these with, so you don't end up like me getting, your body knows. You get people hair fall out, they get bumps, you get ulcers, your body knows. And so talking about it and being on the lookout for it, so you can be one of those folks for someone to, lean on your shoulder during these tough times. And they are tough times. And so being a good listener during this time for everybody, because we all have challenges right now, and especially in the small business community, staying alive, staying open, paying the bills, taking care of kids. I just can't fathom. I'm blessed. I just have my dog here and my husband, and I've been at home since the 10th of March, but I don't have to worry about all those real life challenges that people are facing every day. So I think it is a time of embracement, listening, helping in every way we can.
The last few questions in our discussion, the two words that keep resonating with me, because you already mentioned them earlier, is the empathy and compassion, and how important that is. It seems as a major leadership skill to have in these tough times, for sure. Thank you so much, General Dunwoody, for being with us today. It was such a pleasure to be able to talk with you on video. We all look forward to hoping to see you on campus sometime in the near future. And we wish you all the best in all of your endeavors. And thank you for being such a great role model and leader for women and men in our nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Beth. And thank you for your service as well. And to everyone at the summit, I hope you enjoy this time, make the most of it. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you. Good luck.